Eli was the kind of boy who slipped through the world like a shadow. At 17, he was small for his age, shoulders narrow but sturdy, his brown hair always hidden beneath an old Dawson's market cap. He moved down the aisles quietly, pushing crates of canned soup or balancing boxes of apples, never disturbing the chatter of mothers comparing prices or old men arguing about sports at the magazine rack. Most customers hardly noticed him. If they did, it was only when they muttered, "Hey kid, help me with this," and Eli with a nod lifted what they needed without complaint. He had started working at Dawson's Market when he was 15, taking over when his father left and his mother fell sick. Back then, he was just a skinny boy sweeping the floors after school. 2 years later, he had become part of the store's furniture, the unspoken fixture in the background who made sure the bread shelf never stayed empty, the carts never blocked the entrance, the freezers never stayed broken for long. The other employees called him Quiet Eli. Some teased him gently, tapping him on the back as he worked, but he never minded. Most people assumed Eli was shy because he rarely spoke, but the truth was simpler. The few times he tried to say something, his soft voice vanished under louder ones. So he let his actions talk for him. Every squeaky cart fixed, every heavy bag lifted for a grandmother, every icy patch of sidewalk salted before anyone slipped. That was Eli's voice in the world. He took small pride in it, even if no one else really saw it. He was content to stay unseen if it meant doing what needed doing. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the air outside was sharp with wind. Leaves blew across the cracked parking lot as the automatic doors slid open with their usual tired sigh. The mayor's wife, Mrs. Delaney, stepped inside, wearing a dark wool coat, her hair pinned neat and perfect, pearl earrings catching the harsh lights. She had come alone this time. Usually, she sent her driver or personal assistant. But word at the checkout was she liked to shop herself sometimes to feel normal. Eli watched her from the back aisle as she moved slowly, almost cautiously. She paused near the cereal boxes, one hand pressed to her ribs as if something hurt. Eli saw it all without staring. He watched people the way some people read books. Every twitch of a wrist, every sigh, every extra second, someone spent blinking at a label that should have been easy to read. Mrs. Delaney picked up a small box of oats, placed it carefully in her basket, and took a deep breath before moving on. Eli went back to stacking cans of soup, but his eyes flicked up every few seconds, following her as she drifted down the aisle. Near the produce section, she dropped her keys. They clinked softly on the floor. She bent slowly to pick them up, her knees shaking. Eli's hands tightened on the cardboard box he was emptying. She didn't see him step closer, pushing the box aside and wiping his palms on his apron. She steadied herself on her cart, keys clutched tight, and forced a smile at a nearby cashier who didn't notice her struggle. Eli took one careful step back, giving her space, but staying close enough that if something happened, he'd be there before anyone else. Mrs. Delaney turned into the dairy aisle. Eli pretended to restock yogurt cups, one ear tuned to the sound of her footsteps. She reached for a carton of milk, her hand trembling just enough that she knocked another off the shelf. It bounced once, split open, and splashed cold white across the tiles. The noise made her flinch. She pressed her hand to her forehead, eyes squeezed shut. Eli stepped forward, crouched, and picked up the leaking carton before it could spread too far. He glanced up at her. She looked pale, lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Before she could find words, her knees buckled. She might have cried out, but Eli couldn't hear it. He dropped the milk, lunged forward, and caught her under the shoulders just before her head struck the floor. Her basket tipped over, cans rolling across the cold tiles. He lowered her gently, his knees hitting the floor hard enough to bruise. He checked her pulse with shaking fingers, counted her shallow breaths. He didn't shout for help. He didn't have to. The nearest cashier had seen the fall and screamed for the manager, for someone to call 911. Eli just held her hand. She stirred once, eyelashes fluttering like a broken moth's wings. She focused on him, eyes glazed but searching. He squeezed her hand gently, hoping she could feel the warmth in his palm. The store felt silent for a moment, just the hum of the refrigerators and the far-off wail of a siren approaching. Someone pressed a coat into his hands, and he bunched it under her head like a pillow. A young woman knelt beside him, tears in her eyes as she said, "Is she breathing?" Eli only nodded, squeezing Mrs. Delaney's fingers again. Minutes passed like hours. When the paramedics burst through the automatic doors, Eli stayed where he was, one knee soaked with spilled milk, the other throbbing where it pressed the hard tiles. They lifted Mrs. Delaney carefully onto a stretcher, clipped wires to her wrist, spoke into radios. A medic asked him what happened, but Eli just pointed to the shelf, mimed the fall, and lowered his eyes. One of them patted his shoulder, told him he'd done good. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a grocery boy kneeling in spilled milk, hoping the woman's eyes would open again. As the paramedics wheeled her away, her fingers twitched, searching for his. Eli caught them one last time. Her lips moved soundlessly. Maybe she was saying thank you. Maybe she was saying something else. He'd never know, because the moment broke when the automatic doors slid shut behind the stretcher, cutting him off. From her small, grateful whisper, the hum of the store returned. People went back to shopping, talking in low voices about how they couldn't believe the mayor's wife had almost died right there by the yogurt. Eli's manager, a balding man named Ron, clapped him roughly on the back and barked, "Clean up this mess, kid, then get the carts from the lot." Eli just nodded. He found a mop, wiped up the milk, gathered her fallen groceries and purse, zipped it carefully. He didn't want anyone to steal her things, not when she might need them when she woke up. He put everything in a small paper bag and carried it to the manager's office, where Ron grumbled but promised to call the hospital later. Eli took off his milk-soaked apron, wrung it out by the sink. Outside, the wind had picked up. Eli pushed carts across the cracked parking lot, metal clattering softly. He paused when a single leaf, bright gold, stuck to his sneaker. He bent down, picked it off, and tucked it in his jacket pocket for no reason other than it felt right. Every now and then, a customer passed him and said, "You did good in there, kid." He'd just nod. So words felt too small for what had happened. He couldn't find the right ones, so he didn't say any at all. The sky above was bruised purple and orange, the sun dropping behind the old grocery sign. At home that night, Eli's mother sat in her chair by the window, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of old soap and chamomile tea. She asked him how work was. Eli just kissed her forehead, handed her the grocery store receipt for the tea he'd bought her on break, and made her a cup. He sat by her feet while she sipped, staring at the lamp's soft yellow glow. He thought about Mrs. Delaney's pale hand in his. He thought about how he'd felt her pulse flutter back strong before the ambulance doors closed. He hoped she'd be okay. In bed, Eli lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the loose gutter outside his window. He wondered if she would even remember him. He didn't care if she didn't. What mattered was that for once, his silence had spoken when it needed to. Somewhere in town, a powerful family was whole because a quiet grocery boy knew when to catch someone before they fell. He drifted to sleep with the leaf on his nightstand, its gold veins catching the moonlight like a secret medal pinned on a boy who never needed words to be heard. Morning came cold and grey, the frost on the market's big glass windows like lace. Eli showed up before the sun cracked the sky, pushing open the back door with a gentle squeal that always woke the mice hiding behind the trash bins. He shrugged off his coat, hung it on the hook, and slipped on his fresh apron. The floor felt cold through his thin sneakers. He swept the back hall before the manager came in, just so no one would bark at him for the trail of leaves from yesterday still caught in the corner near the delivery ramp. He didn't expect the store to feel different, but it did. People kept staring at him when they came in, little nods and half smiles where there used to be none. Mrs. Patterson from the bakery counter handed him a free pastry wrapped in napkin when he passed. He didn't ask why. He just tucked it in his pocket for later. The new cashier, Cindy, leaned over the register and whispered, "They say you saved her life. You're a hero, Eli." He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He pushed the cart line up to the bread aisle and got back to work. By mid-morning, the hush had turned into a hum. People talked about him like he was made of newspaper headlines. He didn't want that. He just wanted to do the day, like he always did. But every aisle he turned into, someone's eyes followed him. When he lifted a box for an old lady, she patted his shoulder twice and pressed a crumpled dollar into his hand. When he gave it back, she closed his fingers over it with a look that said, "Keep it." He slid it into his back pocket and went back to stacking bags of rice. Around noon, the manager called him up front. Ron's voice cracked on the intercom, echoing down the soup aisle. "Eli, front desk, please." Eli left the broom propped by the dented tomato cans and wiped his hands on his apron. At the counter, Ron stood stiffly beside a man in a dark coat and a woman with big sunglasses hiding half her face. Eli's heart kicked when he realized it was Mrs. Delaney, the mayor's wife, standing steady, her lips pink again, no hint of yesterday's pale struggle in her cheeks. She stepped forward first, pulling off her sunglasses so he could see her eyes. She looked tired but alive in a way that made his shoulders ease. She held out her hand. Eli looked at it for a moment before slipping his own calloused palm into hers. She squeezed gently, her eyes soft with tears she didn't shed. "You didn't say anything," she said in a voice too low for Ron to overhear. "Not a word, but you were there. You caught me." Eli just shrugged. His throat went dry, so his words stayed buried behind his teeth where they belonged. Next to her, the man in the dark coat stepped closer. He smelled like expensive cologne and leather seats. He introduced himself as her husband, the mayor. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and searching. "Eli, right? I want to thank you properly. What you did for my wife, we owe you." Eli just shook his head, mouth twitching like he might argue but never did. The mayor pressed on, his hand still gripping Eli's shoulder. "We want to help you, anything you need. A job, a reference, college, you name it, son." Eli stepped back slightly, shaking his head again, palms up like I didn't do it for that. Mrs. Delaney leaned in, her perfume soft and floral, and whispered, "At least let us drive you home today. Meet your mother." Eli's shoulders tensed, his eyes dropped to the floor. It wasn't embarrassment, it was the fear someone stepping into the quiet corner of his life he kept safe for his mother and himself. He opened his mouth to say no, but then saw her eyes, kind, hopeful, and nodded once instead. The mayor's sleek black car idled at the curb when they left Dawson's. Eli stood there, feeling the wind bite through his thin sleeves as Ron clapped him on the back with a grin that almost cracked his face in two. "Good kid," Ron said to the mayor like he'd raised Eli himself. Eli didn't argue. He just climbed into the back seat, feeling the soft leather swallow him up. Mrs. Delaney sat beside him, her purse perched on her knees, hands folded like she was holding something precious and fragile that only he could see. The drive was quiet. The streets blurred by, bare trees scratching the sky like old bones. Eli watched the neighborhood slip past. The corner store where he bought his mum's tea, the bus stop where he waited when he was smaller and braver and still believed maybe his father would come back. The mayor talked gently from the front seat about community, about scholarships, about how someone like Eli shouldn't waste his gift for noticing what other people missed. Eli stared at his hands, resting in his lap. The mayor's words felt too big for him to hold. When they pulled up outside Eli's small apartment, Mrs. Delaney touched his arm. "We'll stay in touch," she said softly. Eli nodded. He stepped out onto the cracked pavement, watched the car glide away with barely a whisper. He turned to the building that leaned a little more every winter, climbed the narrow stairs, and unlocked the door to his mother's soft, silent world. She sat by the window as always, blanket over her knees, a crossword puzzle half finished in her lap. She looked up at him with tired eyes that said, "Did you do good today?" He nodded once. In the days that followed, things shifted slowly. At the store, people still stared. The bakery lady slipped him free pastries so often he started giving them to the kids waiting by the bike racks outside. Ron mumbled something about putting Eli's name in for Employee of the Month. Eli just kept doing what he did best, stocking shelves, fixing squeaky wheels, shoveling salt on the icy walk before sunrise so the old men wouldn't slip. Every day felt the same, except now when people said thank you, they said it like it really meant something. One rainy afternoon, a letter came in a fancy envelope with the city's seal on it. Eli found it tucked under the door when he got home from the late shift. Inside was a scholarship offer, not from the mayor directly, but through a community hero grant. No strings attached, no forced interviews or photo ops. Just a chance. His mother read it 3 times before she looked up at him, eyes wet. She mouthed, "You deserve this." Eli shrugged. He knew he wouldn't take it right away. He had work to do at the store. But maybe soon. A month passed, fought back against winter, melting the salt crusts off the sidewalks. Eli still wore his old Dawson's cap, still pushed carts and stacked cans, but when Mrs. Delaney came back, she didn't shop alone anymore. She brought him updates, how she was recovering, how she'd told everyone about the quiet boy who'd seen her when no one else did. She'd squeeze his arm gently as she passed him in the aisle, and sometimes she brought him books she thought he might like. One was about mechanics, another about city planning. He read them both by the window at night. One evening, Eli found himself back where it started. Dairy aisle, humming freezer, rows of milk cartons. He checked the dates like always, pushing the bad ones to the front so he could snag them later for discount. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see Mrs. Delaney swaying on her feet. But she was fine now, stronger. The thought made him breathe a little deeper. He picked up a cracked carton, turned it in his hands, then placed it carefully in the return bin. When he turned, he found Cindy standing there with her warm smile. She nudged his arm. "You ever gonna talk, Eli?" she teased, her voice low. Eli just gave her his half-smile, the one that said maybe someday. Cindy laughed and handed him a fresh coffee from the break room. He nodded once, a small thank you that said more than a sentence could. The store buzzed around them, carts squeaking, cash drawers snapping shut, the same old hum that had always been there. But something was different too. Quiet Eli wasn't invisible anymore. He hadn't needed a speech or a headline. He just needed to see what others didn't. That night he sat by his mother's window again, the scholarship letter spread on the table beside her tea. The streetlight outside flickered, casting shadows on the cracked wallpaper. Eli traced the edge of the paper with his fingertip, thinking of the future waiting quietly outside. Something big, something new, maybe loud, in a way that didn't need words, but needed him to step forward. His mother smiled at him, a proud, soft smile that filled the whole small room with warmth. He looked out the window at the city lights and thought maybe it was time to answer back. When he finally closed his eyes, he dreamed not of aisles or freezers or broken carts, but of walking into a classroom one day, older, braver, ready to build something bigger than Dawson's Market. He dreamed of a voice that didn't need to shout, because sometimes the world heard best when you spoke with your hands and your heart instead of your mouth. And somewhere in that dream, the mayor's wife walked strong through a grocery aisle, her smile soft and grateful, nodding once at the quiet boy who never said a word but saved her world all the same.